All right, so we are back for lesson 3, and we are going to do a couple of projections. If you recall from the last lesson, we went ahead and built the actual 3D geometry here. Now, some of you who are probably familiar with the whole process of clean plating might be asking yourself, hey Matt, aren't you aware that if you can just put your viewer to the camera tracker node and double-click the camera tracker node and grab a series of points like this and right-click and say, create card, you'll have an actual card which will be orientated to all of those dots. And yes, you are correct. You can do that. You can keep coming in here, going back to your camera tracker node, and then just moving through your shot and maybe grabbing like pieces like this, or I can actually grab these guys right here, right click, create, and I can do cylinder as well, sphere, and all these other fun things, but I can create a card there. And now you can see if I take these two together, and then I'll just go ahead and do a merge geo node and plug these two together. I have merged geo here, but obviously as you can see it's not right on the money sometimes. But yes, this is something that you can use as opposed to using the model builder node. So just be aware that some people do use this for different planes of a distance and so forth, and usually they'll have like planes that go this way and then this way, like 90 degrees off. So do be aware you can use this as a tool to do the projection. So let's go back to our model builder node and just go with my technique, which I'm sure you're all thrilled to use. And I'm going to look through the camera again, lock to the camera. And again, we're going to be double clicking the model builder node, so we're jumping back into it. And in this case, if you wish, you can actually come in here and turn off the grid, which I would prefer because it kind of gets in the way and looks very annoying. So with this piece of geometry selected, this card, I can now go into the wrench and go into edit mode, and I'm going to take this and left click and choose edges. So you can see I can grab the edge now. There's a couple modes that you can work in here. You can see the handles position and the handles align. So a handles position, you can go from object surface or object center or selected average. Okay. So here you can see object center is by default object surface, and then with the handle alignment you can either choose object or you could choose world space. So it is totally up to you. In this case I'm probably going to stick with object axes, as you can see, and again I'm going to right click and say extrude and back this up by grabbing the blue handle, and then once again I'm going to right click and say extrude and then grab the handle and drag it with the red handle. And then one more, right click, extrude. Actually in this case, I'm going to hold down shift and grab these two lines here and right click and say extrude. And then again, I'll take the blue handle and drag that out like that. Now, if you're not aware already, there is areas down here that we need to grab. So what I will do is find a frame where we see the floor the most, which is probably somewhere around frame 90. So frame 90, we see the most of the floor. I'm going to right click and choose vertices select, grab the vertices and actually move those down. Now you'll notice I'm having a hard time grabbing this vertice. And the reason being is that this wall is occluding us from looking to the opposite side. So what I have to do is I have to jump out of the camera mode here by clicking off the camera, looking to the default camera, holding down Alt and dragging around, and holding down Shift and grabbing that last vertice. It's this actual wall here that's keeping me from selecting that point. You can see as I try to select it, I can't get it. So I can grab these points, but if I want to grab that other one, I have to hold down Shift and grab it like that. So now I'm going to go over here, jump back into my camera, lock to my camera, and now I can start to drag this down like this. So I'm going to make sure I'm not selecting this point here. And it looks like I accidentally, see here I did it again, so I got to grab all these points, go back to default, grab that guy, and then go back and look through the camera, lock to the camera, and now I can come in here with middle mouse scroll wheel and just drag this down like this. I can also finally take this edge here and extrude this out. So again, I will take this, right click and do an extrusion. So just do an extrude, and just to be safe, what I will do in this case is, if you hold down Shift and Control in here, you will see that you can get actual scale. So I'm going to take this little red area and scale it out a little bit that way, so there's definitely some overlap going on. And then I'm going to drag this out so that it covers up as much as I can possibly get of his feet. So I want to definitely have a nice cushion between here and here, because I want to be able to a little bit of a fade there. So again, if I wish to, I can grab, say, this edge here, and see if I just grab this edge. See, it kind of grabs both. I'll just drag it out like that. Now again, I only need to make geometry for the areas that are behind the actual actor. I don't have to create any geometry for the stuff that's actually in the front of the actor. So with that said, we can jump back into our 3D mode here and just kind of tumble around, unlock from the camera here, and move through the shots. And let me get out of this wipe. I don't know how I got into it. And I will right click here and choose faces, select a face, and just delete it. So I'll use the backspace key, and I don't need that piece of geometry. And I think we still have some weird piece of geometry up here accidentally. So I'll hit F to frame and grab that guy right there and delete him. So this constitutes only the geometry that is actually basically facing from behind the camera itself, behind the character. The foreground area is going to be rotoed with a planar tracker. So in this case, we've created an accurate three-dimensional reality of the scene, so the parallax should match up pretty well. And we did a little bit of some overlap right here so that we don't get like missing rendered area here. Unfortunately, there really is no, there is some merge options here, which is kind of cool, which I haven't really kind of got into at all, but you can do merging. But as you can see here, you know, this is basically all you need. So with that set up, we can now just first off make sure this geometry, you know, looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and jump through the camera, lock to the camera. Remember, we're still looking through the model builder node here. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit play and just make sure that this feels like it's actually sticking correctly in the shot. If I need to lower some pieces of geometry in here, I should, you know, I won't have to or whatever, but you can see there shouldn't be any sliding in comparison to where he's at. Now the camera is very far from the actor right here, so the farther away you get, the flatter the image you get, and the flatter the image you get, the less worry you have to worry about the accuracy of your geometry being perfectly in the three-dimensional space. But if, for instance, if we were doing any clean plating stuff like over here in the foreground, like right here, we'd really have to make sure that this is on model. In other words, this geometry is actually sitting right where it should be in three-dimensional space. Otherwise, we would see sliding and we'll have to recreate our geometry. But this is good enough for what we're trying to do. Okay, so that said, let's go ahead and jump in. And what I do at this point is I take my model builder node, I get it out here, as you can see. And there is a couple options here for projection. Now, you got to actually decide which frame you're going to project from. And I always choose the frame with the least amount of motion blur and where you get the most of the character in the shot that you need to clean out. So for instance, his foot is definitely an issue. So let me go ahead and just kind of move this around until I find a frame. And it looks like frame 90 seems to be the frame that we're going to shoot for. So I'm going to put my frame to frame 90 really quick. And I could say it's probably the most we can see. We can see that banding of the same pixel going on there. But that looks like a really good start. And the reason why I move this model builder node out is we're going to actually do a bake out for a projection. It's going to create a bunch of material, and I don't want it to be sitting over in this area because it'll just kind of layer it onto it. So with the export, I'm going to come in here and say projection, and it's going to project it based on the actual frame I'm sitting on. In this case, frame 90. So I'm going to hit bake. And what you get is this monstrous stuff here. And I'm going to move this all the way down to the bottom, like here. And here is my model builder node. And we'll just move that over here. And I'll just move this, just kind of move this stuff around a little bit. Okay. So what does the projection do? Well, it duplicates the camera. In fact, this camera here is the same thing as this camera. And it frame holds the camera at 90. So if I were to take a look, if I come to this Project 3D node, and I'll put my viewer to it, let's go ahead and back up a little bit here so you can kind of see. And what it's doing is it's taking the camera, and it's just basically leaving it at frame 90. If I were to go back and look at the camera here, you can see we have this here. I'm going to put my properties bin to 2. I usually keep this at 1, by the way. I'm going to put my viewer to camera 1, and then I'm going to put it camera 2, and you can see Well, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see the combination of the two, but it just basically freezes the camera at 90. Now, this is the three-dimensional land on the left, and then the two-dimensional land will be on the right. So if I go ahead and take a look at the viewer here, you can see it's basically the plate shot, right? And here we get a frame hold at frame 90. This is real simple. These are just frame holds. This frame hold, as you can see, is simply a clone of this frame hold. And these type of nodes, because they have this interesting shape, they can be used both in three-dimensional nodes and two-dimensional nodes. If you're not familiar with this, three-dimensional nodes work together and they're circular. Two-dimensional nodes have a square shape, and then these little weird shaped ones say you can kind of use both. So the shape of the edge of the actual node dictates what it is or what it can be used for. So when you have a postage stamp just simply looks at the footage. And this is, again, what I've talked about before, the area of sandwiching. So between this, which I like to call the top of my hamburger bun, and the projection 3D one node, the bottom of my hamburger bun, this is where I do all my cleanup, and then I also do a little bit of a roto work in here to isolate the area. So at this point, I can take this, I can actually, if I wish to, I could do a write node and write this out as a specific file here. So you can, DPX or JPEG or TIFF, and you can export this out and bring it into Photoshop and actually paint him out using Photoshop tools if you prefer. And then at that point, you can actually read in the file itself and path it in here with a switch node if you wish. But in this case, we're going to do all our clone work and all of our work here in this frame, in this little area right here. So the first thing we need to do the footage at this frame 90 is to actually take the noise out. So there's a matter of degraining and regraining the image. When you still frame an actual footage, you have grain that's in there. So you have to take that out. So in order to do that, we are going to come in here, and I am going to do a denoise. So I'm going to do a denoise, and automatically you'll get an error message in here. That's fine. And I will come over here, and I will put this denoise just before the frame hold, as you can see. And you can see it has another input for noise. What I like to do is just create a dot node right here and have this kind of offshoot here and plugged into the noise, just so I can see that there's two there. And with the denoise, if I double click and put my viewer to the denoise, you'll see you got a little square here. Try to find a 50% gray area and make this selection a little bit bigger. And I'm going to try to drag this maybe up in this area here. And it has, because it needs to, this window needs to be a certain size to work correctly, it'll now no longer give you that error message. So if I take a look at the footage now, if I disable and re-enable, we've cleaned the image up. We've softened it up a little bit, and I would honestly tell you that this is a great tool to use, but in the resampling, it softens up your image a lot. The alternative, and what I have used on major television commercials and feature films, is Neat Video. Neat Video is a plugin for about $300. The entire industry uses it. There's no debating it, and it is a great, basically, denoiser or degrainer, simply because it uses an algorithm that keeps the sharpness of the footage. So this is a cheap alternative with the nodes that we get for free inside of Nuke. But again, your best use in whether you're doing cleanup for green screen or for this kind of stuff, you definitely want to use such a program and spend $300 and get yourself Neat Video. So now that we've cleaned that footage up, it now does the frame hold on this specific frame. So at this point, we can come in here and put whatever we want in here. I'm going to get rid of this postage stamp because I really don't need it. And in between here and here is where I do all my cleanup. So I'm going to go ahead and create a Rotopaint node and just plant it in right there, put my viewer to it. And with that said, we're going to come in here and do some very dangerous type of clone work. So I'm going to take my Rotopaint node, and I will take a brush and I'll make it big. Now, there's many different things we can do here. We can clone, we can paint with a brush, we can use blur, we can also use smear if you wish. Let's go ahead and start with clone. And all you got to do is hold down Control and drag out with your left mouse button. The plus sign is where we're going to be targeting for sampling. I like to keep these sort of crossed over close. If you hold down Shift and drag your mouse left and right by holding the left mouse button, you could scale up your clone. I like to move my way around the character by holding down Control and dragging this around. I want to stay close with these two circles, and I want to move in like this. So with that said, you can also take your hardness brush and bring it all the way down to 0, which is the softest brush, and we can kind of come in here and start going to town. So I'm going to make this brush size relatively big, and we're going to just start cloning. And you'll notice that the shadow, you'll notice we have like a shadow, and the shadow from an actual little area right here, if we look, actually should angle down like this. So we definitely want to capture that. So I'm going to take this and just slowly start making my way down here. So again, I'm just going to start cloning this out like so. Now keep in mind I have this set to single frame. I'm going to put this to all, so that any paint stroke I have will be available for every frame. So I'm just going to come in here and do a quick job. Now you can do this in Photoshop. You could go and actually film a shot where the actor got out of the way, or go back and get some plate photography of that from that specific angle, which you should have done on that specific day. Sometimes when you go on a VFX shoot, people will take plate photographs just in case there's a need for, in this case, clean plating. So I'm just kind of giving you the heads up on that. Alright, so let's go ahead and come down here. Now this is going to be the tricky part. We see there's like this white thing here. I'm going to try to get this street kind of cloned in the best I can. And you got to be careful to kind of break up patterns here. So I'm just going to kind of do this. And I'm also going to push myself in a little bit into this edge here. We are going to do a planar tracker for this foreground piece here, but I want to paint into and along this edge all the way up here, all the way up here, all the way up here, and to this edge. So again, I'm just going to come in here and try to clone this in just a hair. You don't have to go too far, but I want to definitely come in here and just grab this edge here and kind of paint into it a little bit, because we're going to recreate, re-roto that foreground area. So again, I could just come in here. I'm using this big heavy area here just to paint out. And we'll just move our way down. And again, I'm just painting away. Again, it's probably good to have an actual still from the plate footage, and then with a little bit of color matching and color correction, lens distortion of workflow, you can actually go in and paint these areas out and so forth. So, all right, so let's go ahead and try to grab a little bit of this and see if I can clone him out as best I can. There will be something that'll look like a pattern, so I have to be very careful here as I start to paint this in. So, and again, don't be afraid to cross over. So you can see the repeated pattern here, and I could break this up by bringing my brush size down and just coming in here and trying to clean this up a little bit. And you got to be careful because it can very quickly get splotchy. And you can adjust that. I usually can use the blur tool and so forth. I'm also going to go over here to my paintbrush mode, and so you can see I could use the brush node. I can come here, click this button, hold down Control, sample this color, so now it's the sky blue color. And then with my brush, I'm going to paint, and I'm going to put this to all frames, and I'm just going to paint in this area here as best as I can. There we go. Now, as you can see, the color information is very plain and perfect here. So again, I could come in here, hold down, just tap in there, maybe grab a darker tone of this by bringing the value down, and also taking my opacity down to like maybe 0.001, and just adding just an ever so different version of this that is slightly darker. So I'll put the value down pretty low. So now you can see like that. And I'll put my opacity down to like 0.01 and just start to paint that in. So you can see I'm getting a little bit of a breakup of that pattern there. And then go back to my clone brush and do some clone work. So again, I could come in here and get rid of that harsh line. The smaller your brush is, the sharper your edge will be, as you can see. And another cool thing about the clone tool is that you can come in here and set the opacity of the clone tool, so I can do 0.01 or 0.04. You can see I can kind of paint a vague texture in here so I don't see that uniformity. See that? So I'm kind of like trying to blend this in the best. And then I'll put my opacity back to 1 and come in here and just start cloning these areas out here. Trying to get that nice sharp edge. I want it to be slightly organic. It's as if he actually got out of the way there. All right, so this is the fun part where we got to get really close and not get too splotchy. And I'm going to be very careful to continue this line. So you can see the angle at which I'm going is this line's going up and down, and I'm trying to follow it. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of paint away. And we can eventually use the blur brush, which I like to use to kind of transition the line a little bit. So you can see right here, I'm desperately trying to hold on to that crossfade there. I'm going to start to lose it a little bit. And I can scale this down. Come over here. So you always want to find, like, try to, when you're doing the clone work, you can kind of work your way across here. And we kind of do that. And there we go. I wish I had some stories to share with you guys as we're doing this. Some industry stories. I can tell you it's actually looking very bleak. This industry's looking very bleak lately. I don't know why. I've actually found myself starting to enjoy and get into game design again. I come from a game design background. So it's just a matter of me kind of like, I'm hearing from people all over the world, they're like, oh, it's very hard for me. Somebody spoke to me and said, like, they're in Belgium, and they're like, oh, it's very, very hard time for a junior artist to get started. Very hard. Every time I hear it's like, it's a very hard time. And I'm sort of like going, what's going on out there? But at the same time, I have students. I just have one student who works for Framestore, and he's like, I'm like, hey, can you talk to my students and give them just a little quick chat, you know? And he's like, oh, man, I'm too busy. I'm sorry, you know. And I get it. And he's traveling all over the place. So, you know, whatever. Doesn't matter to me. You know, as long as they're working, I'm happy. And, you know, it's just what it is. And I also want to talk also about, for those of you that are going to colleges, I did do a whole video about different colleges and, you know, what to decide whether to go to college for this visual effects stuff, where you're going to put yourself into a ton of debt and so forth. So I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I've seen different people succeed, some people not succeed and so forth. And it's just it's a big mess when it comes to you know, the whole, like, should I go to college? Should I not go to college? You know. So let's talk about the shadow going on here. There's actually a shadow. This is actually going into shadow here. So let me first try to clone this area here, right? Again, you can see I'm basically trying to eat into this area here. And now you'll see that it's going into shadow, right? So I'm just trying to create this sort of line here that kind of comes down like that. And again, I could come in here and do all types of things with this. There's also this option for darkening, so I could do like a burn, or I could just use a paintbrush, and I could set the paintbrush to a color that's right here by holding down Control and clicking, and put the opacity really low, like say 0.001. Make my brush size really big, and I can just actually, whoops, let me put that down to 0.001, not 0.9. So we'll start to 0.002. Try that. And now you can see as I paint, I barely see anything. So I'm going to put that up to 4. And I'll bring this up to 6. Now, again, you can see I'm getting a nice, with a big brush, I'm starting to get a nice shadow fall off going on. And I usually will fill in these areas a little bit, but again, I can make the brush size a little bit smaller. And now you can see that I'm trying to transition this area into darkness. See that? So we have a decent cleanup job here. Not the greatest. Finally, we can come in here and add a blur tool. So you can see I go to blur, bring this up. I highly recommend you put this opacity like 0.5. And again, make sure you put this to all frames, and you can see if I just come in here, I can start to blur the transition here a little bit. We're going to be regraining this area. So just maybe a little bit of a blur back there. And this area right here is a little bit splotchy, so I'll just come over here and try to clone that area out. And there you go. So again, it's always good to see what you had before and after. So I will come over here to my frame hold and put my viewer to Rotopaint so you can see the transition. You can see I basically chomped into this area here, here, and here. And I did that for a reason, because we're going to actually do a foreground roto of this area right here. So you can see it's as if he disappeared. Just by looking, I would say that this area probably could use a little bit of cleanup. So again, I'll just come over here and just do some quick cleanup here. And then again, go in and do a 0.005 and then make your brush size really big, and you can start to clone that in. So it's like kind of like a crossfade. You can transition really harsh areas. So here's a pattern. So you can see the pattern. It's like line, line, line. So you can come in here again, put your opacity back to 1. See if you can break up this pattern the best you can. So like so. Another really cool thing with this Rotopaint node is you can actually come over here, click nothing, hit a dot node, and put your frame hold to 90, put your background 1 into here. And now, with our viewer looking through the Rotopaint node, we can come over here and choose a tool set, which is the Reveal tool. So I'm going to go and find the Reveal tool, which I can never find. Where are you, Reveal tool? There we are. And the Reveal tool basically reveals what's behind here. Now, the only problem with that is that when I reveal this area here, it's going to bring back the guy's foot. See that? So what I want to do is, again, you can see as I paint here, you can see his foot gets revealed, is I could actually add a transform node here. And I'll just put my viewer to it. And I can move this footage off to the x-axis. I can move it over to the left here. And now that is going to be revealed wherever I paint reveal. So again, I'll just come over here, hit reveal. Now you can see I can kind of paint this area, which will break up that pattern, right? So now we have like a really cool little use of all these brushes that we've been kind of messing with here. All right, now that I've done that, we are going to take this footage and we are going to regrain it. So how do we do that? Well, first, I'm going to go ahead and do a regrain. And the way we're going to use the regrain is the Furnace Core plugins. And I will just grab this roto node, select it, and do F regrain. Now it's going to ask for the grain. The grain's coming from the original footage, probably just, just before the denoise here. So I'm going to go ahead and make a dot node here and extend this out and plug this into the grain. Hold down Control, make a dot node, pull out a dot node. I'm going to keep this nice and clean and beautiful with 90-degree angles, as you can see here. And I'm going to try to take this and move it over here. So I want these beautiful 90-degree angles. And let's clean up this area right here. It's getting a little too crazy. There we go. Okay. So the regrain tool is sampling from the real footage. If we come over here to the regrain tool, let's take a look at it. So I have my viewer set to the regrain node. You can see if I come over here and just make this box big here, and I'll try to scan an area that's like grayscale. If I scan an area that's black, it's going to be give us really heavy grain. But if I try to take that and hit analyze, it's going to give me this error, cannot work on proxy scale. And that's because I'm sitting at a proxy here. So I got to put this to 1:1. Now I can hit analyze, and now it's analyzed the clip. So if, again, you can see it's going through, and this is a very expensive node. Alternatively, people like to use, whether it's the, if you wish to, you can do a degrain tool, and then you can use a grain tool, as opposed to using a tool such as denoise and regrain. So there's the denoise regain dynamic dual, and then there is the degrain simple, and that would replace the denoise, and then there's the grain. That would be the grain. These are less computationally expensive, just giving you a heads up. And then, of course, you'd probably put the intensity down and the size down a little bit. So I've demonstrated these two previous, but again, it is what it is. So let's take a look at the regrain. I'll just take a look at the footage here. And it's compared to the original here. Let's go ahead and just put our viewer from here to here. And you can see that, actually, let's go to frame 90, why don't we? So we can see these together. So here's the original footage, and here's the regrain. So obviously it added a little bit too much. So I'm going to try to take my regrain node here, put my viewer to it, and I'm going to try to resample this area. Let's just keep resampling it until we get a good result. So I'll hit analyze. Give it a couple seconds here. And I'm going to try to, yeah, there it is. Now it's working. And give it a second to render. You can see it's processing. And it is still very, very noisy. I'm going to try to get an area that is kind of like, there we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit analyze again. Trying to get a grayscale area if I can. It's always good to shoot a gray card in this circumstance, especially as we're getting into more and more exciting territories. So I'm going to put my viewer from the regrain and go back and forth. And from what I can tell, it's matching up pretty good now. And again, I just sampled this area here. You sample dark areas, you're going to get heavy grain. If you need to dial down the grain, you have this grain amount and grain size that you can play with. But I believe we've matched up pretty well. So for instance, if I put my viewer to this regrain now, and I just use my arrow keys to go back and forth on this still image, you can see we've recreated the noise pretty accurately in the noise size regularity. And if I put my viewer back to the original footage right here, you can see that there's that noise pattern. Okay, so now that we have done that, we can now go ahead and comp this in. Now we need a projection material. This is the material, now it's asking for a piece of geometry here. So I'm going to hit create a dot node by hitting the period button, pull this over here, and we're going to use as geometry the actual model builder node where we created our card. So I'm going to throw that in there. Okay, so there you go. Now the apply material node has options for display and rendered. So for display, I like to do textured, and then for render, I like to use textured. So let's put our viewer to the apply node now, and now you can see what is going on here as we look through our footage. Now we're getting some interesting artifact here. I'm trying to figure out what happened here, and I believe the reason being is if I go back to my Rotopaint node, I have a couple frames here where I have frame 97, and these all have to be set to a lifetime of all. So I'm going to click all of my nodes. I'll click the bottom one, scroll up, hold down Shift, and select the top, so I can select all these, and I'm going to go to my lifetime and choose all. So I'm going to click on that. So now every clone, no matter where if I put my viewer to the Rotopaint node, if I scrub, you can see these paint strokes are on every single frame, which is important. So with that said, let's go ahead and back again and look at our apply, and you can see we've basically projected from that still camera, which is this camera right here set at a frame hold, we've projected the actual geometry on here. So if we kind of play through the shot, we have that frame at frame 90 is projecting. So what I can do now is do a scanline render node. And I'm going to choose the object from which I want to render, which is apply material. I'm going to choose the camera from which I want to render, which is the camera that's unheld, right here. And then I'm going to just take a look at this. So I'm going to put my viewer to it. And now I have to hit the tab key to go back into three-dimensional land. So here you can see what's happened. We've basically taken this geometry and we have projected onto it, and we have if we hit the letter A for alpha, we actually have transparency here. Now this is a bit of a harsh edge, which is a lot of real estate, and I only need to cover up the guy himself. So I'm only going to do an external roto around the area. You can see we do have the grain in there. If you take a look, see the grain is moving. So that works out really well. But I want to add one last piece in my sandwich area. If you recall, this is the top of the bun, and this is the bottom of the bun. So here's the regrain node. I'll go ahead and move that right there. And I'm going to add a roto right about here. So I'll just go ahead and take the regrain, hit the letter O for roto, put my viewer to it. And I am going to roto around the area where the actor is. So one technique I like to do this with is using my nice little swap here between, if I wish. So what I'll do is I'm going to take my viewer, and I am going to, first off, let's go to frame 90 while we're at it. Make sure we're sitting on frame 90. I'm going to put my viewer here. I'm going to make sure my property has been set to 2. Put my viewer here. Take this here and put my viewer here to the roto node. And now I have these 2 different nodes selected. And now I'm going to use my actual cross dissolve here. So I'm going to do a stack like this, or I'll do a wipe. Okay. And I have roto 1 over dot 1. That's dot 1 right there. And with this little spread button, I can crossfade between the 2. So let me just make sure I did this right. So roto 1 under here, and there's the guy. And you can see I can crossfade this. So if I put this at half transparency and move this over here, I can see where the guy is at. See that? So that's a nice way to kind of know where to draw my roto. So now I can take my roto, and first off I'm going to disable it. I'm going to hit D to disable for now so it doesn't make any effect. And I'm going to roto around the character, probably like right there, and I'll move my way down the pipe here. And remember, he crosses over very heavily here into this area, so I definitely want to get a hold of him. And this is going to be a tricky area right here. Let's move this in a little bit. And there. Okay, so with that said, I can come over here now and get out of this by hitting this dash line. I'm going to set my roto node on by hitting D to re-enable it, and I'm going to put this to output alpha pre-mult RGB replace. So what I get is an alpha image that, if you take a look at the footage, it's basically noised up scene here. Probably want to add a feather to this. So I'm going to take this and feather it out a little bit. Probably inverse there. So maybe a -9 in the feather. And now I can go ahead, take a look at my scan line, or my apply material. Let's go ahead and look through that. And you can see what it is I'm projecting, just the area where the actor is actually at. So here's the before. If I turn this roto off by disabling it, here is the newly carved out area. And I only want to include the area where the guy's at. So let's go to the scanline render node, hit the tab key, and here you can see what we've done. I'll hit the letter Q to hide the overlays, and you can see we have this motion. Now, the thing I forgot to do was that I have to add motion blur to this scene here. So I'm going to take this scanline render node, and I'm going to take these samples up pretty high. Okay. And probably at least 2. When you enact into 2 samples, you actually start enabling motion blur. And now I have to adjust the shutter speed. Now I did a no-no, and I actually took the grain. I grained it. I grained the image before the motion blur. So I'm going to have to take this node out by holding down Shift, Control, and X, like that. And I'm going to have to add the grain after this point. So to do that, I'll put the source footage in and the grain in. And if I look at it now, you will see that it's actually graining up the entire footage here. See all this noise outside here? So how do we avoid doing that? It's really, really simple. What you do is you unpremult the image here. You allow for the regrain to happen, and then you premult the image here. So now we don't have that grain on the outside, we only have it out here. Grain is the last thing to occur in the stacking order. There should be a motion blur, and then the last thing you add is grain. So you can see here's the grain itself. So this is the order we want to do, and I kind of lost my brain there when I built this, so let me just kind of organize this a little bit nicely. So a lot going on here, obviously, right? You guys are like, oh my goodness, but this is the way that the industry works. So now I have a nice alpha, I have a nice animation of grain in there, and now all we have to do is merge this on top. Now, before we merge this on top, we have to realize that we have to redistort the CG here, all right? So what does that mean? Well, that means we have to take this undistort plate, which is undistorting the footage. We cannot simply just merge this onto our original plate. So for instance, if I hit the letter M for merge, and I put A for a top, right? And B for background, which would be the original footage, right? Let's go ahead and come up here. And we basically stop at the shuffle node here, or actually at the remove node. So I'm going to put that at the remove node. Okay, I'll hold down Control and make a little hotkey there. And move this down. So let's take a look at this merge node together here. So I put my viewer to the merge node, and you'll see that it looks like it's off a little bit. And the reason being is we need to redistort the CG. This is technically CG. This little scanline render is technically like a little V-Ray or a little mental ray or a little Arnold render engine. And we need to redistort the CG and add back the barrel lens distortion. The way you do that is you take your undistort plate, you hit Control-C, Control-V as in Victor, paste it, and to make a undistort node a redistort node, you turn off undistort, and obviously I like to relabel it redistort. So now all I have to do is take this and add it at the very end, right here, at the end of the shot. So I can take this redistort node and plug it in like that, and voila, it matches up perfectly. So again, what we do is we take the CG and we render it. Now you notice it actually pushed outward. Sometimes if you do your undistort, the footage will actually stretch out and then pull back in, and you'll get a clipping here. In that case, you want to come back to your scanline render node. I'll hit Q to go back on my overlays. And you would just want to make sure there's enough buffer of rendering going on the outside. So what I usually do in that case is under scanline render, I do a little bit of overscan to render a little bit more data underneath here. So that if it does squeeze in, then it'll actually like squeeze or stretch that information in, and there will be data here. Otherwise, this pixel will repeat and you'll get banding. So if you do get weird banding along the edges, increase your overscan when you're working, and also you might want to turn your anti-aliasing to low. This is a scanline tool. Let's see how it looks. I would say just by using my arrow keys, you can see the two different grains actually match pretty well. I'm pretty happy with this. In the next video, we're going to go in and we're going to have to recreate and using a Planar Tracker this area right here. But as of right now, we have a really good match in our shot. You can see here the edges are, this is a little bit odd because it kind of goes into this blurry mess. So I'm probably going to jump back into my Roto node here and put my viewer to it and double click it. And I can come over here and grab this. I want to sit on the frame I have the keyframe, which is frame 90, or I can just alternatively turn on my ripple edit tool, but make sure you turn that thing off when you don't need it. And I'm going to hold down Control and drag out a transition here. And this is going to give me a nice crossfade besides the initial blur I have on here as well. Like that. So let's see how that looks. You do not want to have any animation on this roto moving around, so make sure everything's done on only one single keyframe. So now I'll put my viewer to it, and you can see that the transition is not as harsh. And see how it looks blurry there? So I'm kind of like transitioning into this other footage. And again, if you wish, you can transition the rest of these if you feel that you need to. Again, I'm only doing this on one frame. I only have one little blue tick keyframe there, so make sure that you're, not cheating. So if I don't want to get too close to the actor, though, because if I get too close, you see he starts to fade in again. So I just want to have a nice transition there of data. And again, I'll just pull this like right there. And that should do it. You can also just add a little bit of crossfade. I love using these little feather options. They really sell the goods, so to speak. Let's pull that out like that. There we go. So again, I hit the letter Q. Let me go back to my merge node. You can see it. We've eaten into the wall a little bit here. That's fine. We're going to recreate the original area here with a Planar Tracker. So again, not a big deal. Not a big deal at all. So let me just show you the full scene as it is with all the nodes. I'm going to get in the practice of actually just allowing you to see each node as it is. So I like to just click on these, and you can still frame the YouTube video or whatever the video that you're looking at, so you can see exactly what I did. So I'll just go through and show these, and I will eventually have the supplementary materials up on the website. The basics should be up there right now, but you can see I got all this. And one last thing before we end the lesson is try to find a frame with some heavy motion blur. So use your arrow keys and look for a big jolt of camera move. And I would say right there is a good camera move. So I can come over here, and with my scanline render node, you can adjust under multi-samples, you can adjust the shutter. If you increase this, you're going to get a higher motion blur. Let me make sure I'm looking through my merge node here. There we go. If I increase my shutter speed, you can see I'm getting more and more motion blur added. I just want to match with the original footage. I find that in this case, we only need more than like 0.23. If you put too much, like to exaggerate this, I'll put the shutter to something nuts. You can see it's way too much motion blur. So I'm going to bring this down to something like 0.3. That's probably good enough. Yeah. And if you feel that the grain is too noisy here compared to the original plate, which I don't see that, again, you can come back over here to your regrain and take the grain amount down and up. So you can see if I take this, kind of keeps the grain noise size and all that set up. If you find that the size of the grain is too big, relatively speaking, you can start to bring it down. And but I think it matched up pretty well. I'm going to dial that down just a little bit. So one way before we actually end the lesson here, let me just go ahead and click through these so you can see what I did, is to actually quickly, obviously before you leave and do anything, is play this through, let it cache, and see how it looks. I can see over here I got a little patch of black. I probably need to transition this area, but it should hold up pretty well, so I'm going to pause and come back. Okay, so just by looking at the footage, you can see I don't see any jolting or jittering. I'm not seeing any sliding. That means our geometry is where it should be relative in 3D space to where this wall is in the actual scene in real life. Obviously, we kind of chomped away at this wall and this edge here a little bit, which we're going to fix in the next lesson. The grain seems to be matching. I'm not seeing any jumping or jittering. I do see a pattern down here from my clone work that I probably can kind of go in and fix a little bit. But otherwise, this is looking really clean and inconspicuous to the average grandmother that's watching this on television or at a movie theater. So again, the next lesson we'll do the foreground planar track roto and kind of fix this little area up for the finale.